Okay, I am back. Apparently I have a terrible habit. I am not proficient in video or digital technology, and I have this habit of, instead of pausing the video, I tend to hit the stop button. So this is part 2, or the second video, and I apologize for that. I'm going to practice just hitting that pause button. Okay, so at this point we have let our canvas dry a little bit, so we still have our, that's upside down, our ombre of colors from light to dark working up our canvas. This time around I do have a box. The box is for the splatter painting, just to contain it a little bit. You don't always need a box. You could lay out paper on a table. There's a variety of ways to do the surface, or if you set it outside on the grass, which I have done as well, or outside on paper, then it kind of contains the splatters without getting them everywhere. With that, it is recommended as well that if you have aprons or other things, or you do not want to get little splatters of white paint on your clothes, I recommend you take the time to put on an apron or a smock or a t-shirt, even if it's that you turn your t-shirt inside out. I've heard of painters doing that often, or if you're painting a house, things like that, so that it doesn't get on the outside of your clothes. With that, I do have white paint that I have put onto the center portion of this palette, so you are going to need some white paint. You could also put it onto the paper plate if you want, but you are also going to use a dish scrubbing brush, and this can be shared. Not everybody needs their own. You're just going to be using it for a couple minutes. The nice thing about a dish brush is that these bristles are really stiff, and so as you run your finger, they move and then they pop right back up, which is what we need if we want to try to splatter. So the idea is that we would run our finger along that, it would spray the little paint, and then the bristle would pop back up. So that little fling of the bristles is what creates the splatter. So in the middle of my little dish, I do have some paint. The paint is a little bit thick. Sometimes it's helpful to water it down just a little bit or add some water to it. I do have my blue water bucket still right here. I'm going to dip that in just a little bit and kind of rub the bristles around on that paint just so that I've got a little bit on there. So keep in mind that if you get too much on there and you get big drips, that's also going to create just a larger star on your canvas. But you may or may not want that. So it kind of depends on how you want to do it. With this, I am actually going to prop up the box a little bit to try to show you. Let's see, I don't know if that's propped enough to kind of show you this process. But I'm just going to angle the brush down, and then I am adding in, just kind of rubbing my hand along it. It's creating little tiny speckles along there. So you can make it more concentrated or less concentrated by how many you do that. So I do have some larger ones. It is going to make your fingers messy, so you will need to wash them in between. So here is my night sky with some splattered stars in the sky. There are some larger ones on there, there's some smaller ones, and if you wanted to make it more like the Milky Way going across in a specific angle, you can kind of control that as you angle the brush and point in the direction that you want the stars. So once we have this portion with a little bit of splatters on there, if you wanted to add any larger stars, this is where your brush kind of comes in handy. So it's obviously up to you. Maybe you want just one or two larger ones. So if so, you're going to use the end of the paintbrush, dip it into the paint, and then you could just add some kind of larger stars. If there's a certain constellation that you love and are aware of, I tend to love the Big Dipper for some reason, even though I don't know why. I think it's probably the only constellation that I can always find in the sky. So once you've got that, you can actually use the bristles of your brush And this is where it is kind of helpful also to water it down just a little bit. So I'm going to get that wet, use more of a glaze, and then I can also kind of paint. Oh, that's not quite. I've got too much paint on my brush. Too much water. It's a little too wet. So then I can also, if I wanted to, paint just a little glowing portion around some of those stars to make them stand out a little bit. So I don't have to. This one, I did make a mistake, right? You guys can see it, huh? Right here. So that's a little bit too wide of a glow, but if I wanted to just bring that out into more of a ring around it, can. So the idea is you could just add a few little rings of light or brighter light around some of those stars in particular. Obviously you don't have to add any little rings, and I definitely went way too wide on that first one, but if you wanted to make it look more like its own little galaxy as well, then you've got that option. So this one I might just make into a larger spinning galaxy gallery, yeah. So I've got kind of my own night sky. Also, the little glaze is helpful if you wanted to do more of a shooting star. You could also add that in. It's up to you. Or you don't have to do any of these larger stars, and you could just simply leave it as the splatter painted night sky. And that is totally up to you as well, because it can easily get carried away. And sometimes I get a little carried away. It's hard to know when to stop. And I think that is one of the bigger struggles as an artist, is you can work an area and you can rework it, but sometimes we overdo it a little bit. So if I've overdone this a little bit and I want to lift some of that paint off, one thing I can do is just use straight up water. Doesn't always work because it is acrylic paint, but if I'm just using water, I'm going to tilt that down. So I'm just getting it wet, just using water, re-wetting that paint. And then what I can do is grab a paper towel, which I need to go do quick. And then while that is still wet, I can lift out some of that paint. So, which lightens it a little bit. It's still there, but you've kind of got your own leeway. Once again, just the warning, it's hard to know when to stop. So I would recommend, if you do make a few of the brighter stars, you know what, that's what I should probably actually do. Sometimes if you make a mistake, you can just simply add more of it so it doesn't look out of place. So this one's kind of large. Maybe I'll just add some more brighter rings around some of these other stars so they're a little bit bigger. And then this initial one that I painted doesn't look so out of place. If I wanted to add another one, kind of spread it out, and I can. So that little glaze is just kind of a lighter, brighter aura around some of those stars. Okay. One of the great things, though, about acrylic paint is that it is pretty forgiving, as long as it's still wet. The other great thing about it, though, is you can paint over top of it. So, for example, if this dried, acrylic paint covers easily. The sad thing about, if this was to dry and I was to repaint it, I would repaint over everything because I've got this nice blend from one to the next. But it's always a learning process as you're painting. Every painting is going to be a little bit different, and just like people, we are all a little bit different, and so nothing is ever going to turn out exactly the same as we've done it before. So it's a little give and take with it. Okay, so once we have this beautiful night sky with my stars, got my little comet, I'm pretty happy with how these turned out after I went in and just added some larger rings around those other ones so that it brought it all kind of to the same consistency so that this one didn't seem so out of place anymore. I just added a few more in. Okay, the last step we're going to do, we've got to set this off to the side to let it dry one more time. And then the last step for today is going to be drawing out our mountains and or trees. So you get to decide which one you want to do. At this point, you are going to be using a piece of construction paper. The construction paper is awesome because it is 9 inches by 12 inches, which is the exact same size as your canvas or your canvas board, which that was on purpose and intentional so that as you draw out the silhouette shape, you can then cut it out and use the piece of paper as a template to draw in your mountains. It's just helpful if you're not as comfortable with the shapes of mountains or trees. So we're gonna actually jump over to the whiteboard. At this point, you are going to need a pencil, your construction paper, and a clean surface to work with. So if you have paints or other things out, it's a great time to clean those up, clear off your surface, set your canvas board off to the side. Oh, before we set it off to the side too much, there is one very important thing. Be sure that you write your name on the back. And I probably should have reminded you beforehand. If you've got the canvas boards, just writing it along this frame, or I mean the canvas frame, you can write it along the frame. If you're doing it on the board, you can write it anywhere on the back. I recommend Sharpie. Pencil does show up, but Sharpie is also great for things like that. So be sure your name is on your canvas board so as it dries, it doesn't get mixed up with anybody else's. You're going to set that off to the side and then go ahead and use a few minutes to clean up your workspace. So then when you come back, you have your piece of construction paper, it doesn't matter the color, and a pencil with an eraser. You'll also end up needing a pair of scissors. So I'm going to pause the video this time instead of start it and go ahead and do what you need to get cleaned up and set up. Okay, we're going to start back up again. You guys should have your paper in front of you and a pencil. I'm just going to draw on the whiteboard. The square is more square than it looks, but the angle of the camera throws it off a little bit. So with that, you have the opportunity to either draw a second square, a mountain silhouette, or trees. So some of you may already be very comfortable drawing mountains and or trees. Some of you may not. So we're just going to quickly review. If you are drawing trees, you are typically going to start with the top kind of angle of the tree, and then as you draw them down, they're just going to be these little pointed lines that go down. So if we're doing a silhouette, you don't necessarily need all the sides of the trees, but you would just continue to draw these little zigzag lines from the top, kind of back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And some of those trees are going to be smaller, some may be taller. But as you draw them out, you do want to keep in mind that you want these little pointed portions of the branches, the ends of the branches, to be pointing down. So it kind of goes down, in or up a little bit, down, in and up, down, in and up. So you're working your way down, in and out. And they're all going to be different. So you don't have to worry about them looking the same. They're all going to be different. The positive side to this is that if you get a really good silhouette, then you can just transfer this as a stencil onto your canvas board. The same with the mountains. So we're just going to practice drawing mountains now. If you were to draw mountains, you also are going to have those peaks. We're just going to angle down smooth. With mountains, obviously there's typically overlapping shapes, and so you see a variety of sizes. Sometimes there will be other ones behind. Maybe I'm going to make this one a little taller. So you're just doing kind of those overlapping shapes, but your ultimate shape that you're working on is just, that looks more like hills. and I don't love the silhouette shape. So I'm gonna erase it and maybe start with, maybe I'm gonna do a taller mountain over here with a bigger valley and some other shapes inside there. That mixes it up a little bit. If I erase it out, I can see what just that silhouette shape would look like. And I like that one a little bit better. So, make it a little more pointed. On your sheet of paper, you are going to use your pencil, and I'm actually going to do it on a green sheet of construction paper so you can see it better against the white background. As well as I'm going to use a marker so you guys can see them better. So what you can do is you can actually, on your paper, draw mountains on one side and trees on the other side, cut them out and decide which one you like better. If there is a specific style you like better. So I'm just working on my trees, coming down. Some I like better than others. Some are going to be taller. Some are going to be shorter. And they're not perfect. I'm going to make that one a little bigger. Maybe I'm even going to add some more in between. And that's okay. I'm going to flip my paper over. So if I was to do the mountains now, and I really liked it where I've got that one taller mountain along the edge, and some smaller mountains. Maybe this one's even going to come up a little bit higher. Okay, once I have it on my sheet of paper, I do have two options because why not, right? Okay, so I've got my mountain shape. I'm just going to cut out the edge. So I don't want to cut down where I have lines coming down in between the mountains. I'm just simply cutting out the silhouette shape of those to start with. So I just cut out the shape of the mountains. Obviously right there I have my overlapping lines. Here's the silhouette shape all by itself. I'm going to show you really quickly what we're going to do with that little piece. So as we've got our beautiful night sky, I can lay out my mountain silhouette how I think I would want it. And then at this point, what did I do with my pencil? So at this point, what I can do is I can just, if this is the mountain shape I want, I can lay my paper down. Obviously, I can make those mountains taller or shorter, sliding them up and down the page depending on the contrast I want. So if they're too high up, they're going to blend in with that dark sky, and I don't want that. So I do want it to be low enough that wherever my mountain edge is, that it's against the lighter night sky. So what I can do then is I can just trace along that shape. And obviously I would typically do this by laying my canvas and my paper down on the surface. The pencil is sometimes going to be tricky to see, however, because it's not actually black and graphite is more of a gray, you can usually get the shimmery color of the graphite if you move it to be able to see it with the light. So the light reflecting off of that will usually give you a good shape as to where that goes. Okay, if you wanted to do your tree silhouette, then you've got your work cut out for you on cutting it out, which is why it may not be the option that you want, or maybe it is. So one thing that I do recommend is starting out just by cutting out the general tree shape along the outer edges first. So at first it's just going to look like a bunch of triangles, and that is great because it's getting that top shape of the tree. I will tip this down so you guys can see that a little bit better. So if I'm getting the top shape of the trees, Right now, they are just a bunch of triangles. And on the back, this is the triangle silhouette shape I want, or that I have. So if I want to leave it like this, and I feel like that looks like trees, great. I can go ahead and lay this on my canvas. Almost, my paper is green, so it probably looks more like grass. But I actually really like the texture of cutting up and in. So this part does get a little bit trickier, but if you can just work on cutting out little triangles along the sides, and it doesn't have to line up just like it did before. So if the tree shape ends up, let me turn it this way so you can see that shape, morphing, there's nothing wrong with that. Once again, you're just going to cut in and then angle up to that inward point. It doesn't have to be perfect, they don't have to be the same, but the idea is to get a good tree line or a good shape for the edges of those trees, which are going to be a little bit more zigzagged, and they are going to be angled a little bit different. But if you can get comfortable with cutting in kind of flat and then up to that point, then you do end up getting a pretty nice edge line on the trees. If this feels too complicated, but you feel comfortable after having drawn it out on the paper, and you just want to go in and draw in the shapes of the trees with the triangles and the little zigzags coming down, you are welcome to do that as well. So I realized this was a lot of instruction going off of this prior to just telling you you could draw it on, but I did want you to get comfortable with the shapes prior to drawing it on here. Obviously, if you have a pencil, you can erase a little bit, but you also don't want a bunch of pencil lines where you aren't going to paint on top of it. Okay, so once you have your silhouette shape drawn on, it's kind of hard to see with the graphite, you're going to go back to getting set up to paint. This time you are going to use your paintbrush, and you are going to use black paint only. You don't necessarily want water. You could use water, but at this point you want the black to be able to cover up the lower portion of the night sky. So if you've got too much water, your paint's going to be runny and it's not going to be able to cover what you've got down here already. So go ahead and grab your canvas again, which you should already have actually because you just traced the silhouette. Be sure you've got the silhouette traced on there, and get set up with a brush, probably a smaller or a fine brush, depending on edge lines and corners, and then get some black paint on either a palette or a paper plate. So I will pause it and then we'll go in and we'll paint those final details. Okay, so here we are. This time I do have mine set up on a canvas just so it's easier for you guys to see. You guys might have canvases or you might be on the table, and either way works great. So I've got a brush. It's typically a round brush is helpful for things like this. As I get paint on the brush, if I feel like that end of the bristles are too wide and not going to give me the control I want, I can pull my brush and twist it to get some of that paint off. And as I pull and twist, it reforms a tip on my paintbrush. So I may or may not need that, but one thing to keep in mind is I do want to pull my brush. I never want to push my brush, I always want to pull it. So depending on which way I'm painting, the first thing I'm going to do is just paint along that black, or just paint the edge line. So I'm using the edges of the bristle to pull as I paint it, tilting. So I'm just getting that silhouette shape of my mountains, pulling and dragging the brush. Pulling and dragging. Got this last one. The great thing about this is if you go over your line or under your line, it really doesn't matter too much. You are just getting that overall general shape. So once you've got that silhouette shape of the mountains, then it is just a matter of painting in that entire space. So if at this point you want to switch to a larger brush, you are welcome to, but you're just using whatever you feel comfortable to fill in the rest of that silhouette shape. I am actually going to go grab and switch to a larger brush just to speed it up. So in this case, I'm just going to switch to a large flat brush, which just lets me spread that on quite a bit quicker. I am paying attention as well to my canvas frame. I'm going to paint the bottom edges and sides to that as I go. And if I have that initial line thick enough, then it's pretty easy just to paint inside the shape where I need it. So get that bottom edge of the canvas. And there I've got my silhouette shape of the mountains against a beautiful night sky. So I hope you guys enjoyed this painting today. Obviously you'll probably still have a little bit more time to continue painting and to finish cleanup. So hope you guys enjoyed, and we will see you next week. Thank you so much.